Good evening and welcome to Fishhawk Live and the Great Lakes Fishing Podcast. Tonight we're joined by Captain Ross Robertson from Bigwater Fishing. Ross, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. We've done a few of these things. I think this one might be a little different though, maybe.
Yeah, a little bit different, but we've been doing this live thing here once a week now for about 8 or 9 weeks, and it's been really fun having lots of different characters and great to have you on, speaking of characters. So we appreciate you taking the night off. I know that you guys have been super busy down on Lake Erie doing a bunch of charters, and you were out on the water today. How'd your day go today?
We had a good day. We started off when it was literally flat calm. And, sometimes that's a nice thing on the back and everything and the pocket while you're driving out there, but it's not always the best for fishing. And about 10 minutes in, we were almost getting to our spot there, and the east wind kicked up. So that's normally not a good thing either. It was just a weird day. And then it literally got so fogged in, you probably couldn't see 100 feet in front of you. And so it was kind of a weird day. But the good news is the fish were biting. So that's always a plus, but it was definitely a weird start. I don't think I've ever seen fog like that in June.
Yeah, but people can deal with a lot of things if the fish are biting and the net's wet.
That is a fact. I mean, it's amazing how just like one fish in fishing, like I get guys and they're just super quiet, or somebody loses one fish or something and the boat is just like deadly silent, or you get a couple guys that just don't even talk, which is sometimes kind of weird because I'm such a motor mouth, as you know. And then you get one fish in the boat and just everybody's a chatty Cathy, and all of a sudden they're not cold anymore, or they're not hot anymore. And so it doesn't take much.
Yeah, fish is a good cure. Ross, before we get started tonight, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your charter, Bigwater Fishing?
Bigwater Fishing, we've been in business for 20 plus years, and we do things a little different than some guys. We were the first small boat charter on the Great Lakes there, and or not the Great Lakes, but just Lake Erie anyhow. Maybe the Great Lakes, but I doubt it. And it was ironic because Al Linder kind of got me into the game for doing the educational trips. He said, "Bob, you got to do these educational things, teach these people." So a lot of my clients, they've got their own boat, and we help them everything from electronics to rigging to maybe trying to catch a trophy to just taking a father and son out like we're going to do here shortly. So we run out of a Ranger 622, which is a 23-foot boat, and we move with the fish, so we're not kind of stuck at one place, and it's a hands-on deal. And then we run a media company. We basically do everything with companies we work with, like Fishhawk and Sims and Fish USA, and we produce content that you may have seen on our YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and then also some of the commercials and stuff like that you see.
Yeah, I see you all over the place doing Fish USA videos. I've been seeing you on the Lakewood page quite a bit lately as well. So you're kind of a guy that's not only helping people that are hiring you to charter, but you're helping people kind of all over the internet with lots of different advice and information that you're putting out there. I know you've done a lot of stuff with, you've written a lot of magazine articles and those things as well.
Yep, and the magazine stuff, unfortunately, is kind of going away a little bit, but I'm still I do a monthly column for In Fisherman, also for Meat Eater, and still write for like Field and Stream and Outdoor Life, just on the digital format now that they don't have the print stuff. So a little bit different way of doing it, but in some cases probably even a little more updated. So,
Ross, you talked about guiding out of that small boat. What made you do that? I know you touched on a little bit on some of the advantages of that, but what are kind of the main advantages out of guiding out of a smaller boat?
Well, I think that, I kind of learned it from some of the bass guys, ironically. The Steve Clapper is a name that maybe you do or don't know, but he's probably the winningest smallmouth angler of all time. And, he was fishing a bass boat for these things when nobody was doing it on the Great Lakes. And I ran into him on places on the lake, 20 years ago, or maybe even more than that. And me and him were kind of fishing a lot of the same stuff, even though we were fishing for different species. And the one thing we had in common is we were both winning a lot, and we were catching fish that our guys weren't just on. And I learned real quick that, boat control from traveling with guys on the PWT like Gary Roach, like you can just do things in a, whatever you want to call it, trailerable boat with an electric motor that you can't do in those big boats that those guys traditionally have out here, like a 27 or a 30-foot sport craft that you see on Lake Erie or Lake of the Woods. They're pretty much, they're stuck, So a day like a couple days ago was flat ass calm. Those guys they're uphill with no paddle, backwards, snowing, all the bad stuff. So with what I can do, I can move the boat too. We may launch, in Cleveland one day, and then I may hide out behind the Bass Islands when we get a big east wind or something the next day, or when water clarity changes. So you can provide a lot more results and a lot less excuses.
And folks, if you're watching tonight, once again, put Put those questions for Captain Ross Robertson in the comments. He's been doing this for a long time. He's on the water just about every day and really all year long out on Lake Erie. So if you got questions on trolling for walleyes or just about the water, put them in the comments. And once again, as we do every week, we will pick the question of the night to win that Fishhawk swag bag. Ross, another thing I wanted to talk to you about is Lake Erie itself. And I mean, was it 40, 50 years ago? A lot of people talked about Lake Erie as essentially a dead lake. There wasn't really much there that you wanted to go after. And now it's really one of North America's success stories. The fishing really has never been better. Tell us a little bit about that transformation and kind of what went into that.
I'm older than some of the guys now, but I'm still younger than many. And I don't remember the whole deal, right? I was too young for a lot of it, but the Cuyahoga River catching on fire in the 60s, if I'm not mistaken, I still get people, not as much, but I bet you maybe a couple times a year they go, "Are you sure we can eat these fish? Like Lake Erie, it's all messed up." And I think there's a lot of fake news out there, especially with this algae bloom thing. People, I think, they want to get a story sometimes. I know all the time I'm getting asked to be interviewed by different news organizations about how crazy the algae bloom is right now. And I'm like, we don't even have one. And, they move on until they get somebody else that wants to hear about that. But realistically, our lake, I think, is in good a shape as we've ever had. I mean, we've like 150 million estimated fish, catchable fish. Right now we're catching a ton of fish between like 10 and 12 inches, 13 inches, which, is kind of annoying, but it's a great problem for the future. And the lake is clean, man. We get some storms that stir things up, but day in and day out, I mean, it's not uncommon some places out in that lake to have anywhere from 5 to 15 foot of visibility. And our forage base seems to be pretty good, even though I think some of the guys wish we had some more shiners. But things are good. I mean, in my lifetime, certainly we've got more fish and seemingly better conditions.
Tell us a little bit about why that walleye fishing is so good. I mean, what is it about Lake Erie that has made it become kind of this walleye capital? I guess we'll call it the walleye capital of the world. I know there's a lot of people in Minnesota who might want to smack me around for saying something like that about a lake not in Minnesota, but what is it about Lake Erie that's made it such a great lake for walleyes?
Yeah, I hear a lot of places that claim to be the walleye capital, and I'm not trying to dig on any of those guys, but I got a little hometown pride here too. And I mean, even like Mille Lacs in the day, and I know I'm really going to anger some guys with this one. I think the estimated population, it was like between 300,000 and 500,000. And when you start throwing around, you got 150 million fish out there. That's a big number. That's a big number. You want $300,000 to $500,000, or you want 150 million, right? And it's just, I think, again, I'm not a biologist, but I think we're kind of just geographically located in the right spot. I've heard something like 80% of the catchable game fish of the entire Great Lakes are in Lake Erie. And I think, we're unfortunately kind of right on the edge of the ice belt, but that also helps us with just having a fertile lake. It's a lot shallower. Our water turns over a lot faster. So when we do have problems, it kind of cycles through, and we have a lot of forage because being that southern most, if you will, on the Great Lakes, it really helps with things like the gizzard shad, where we're on the northern range of those. And a lot of those big walleyes really like eating those gizzard shad. And so we've got a lot of different forage bases, and unlike other bodies of water that kind of rely on one or maybe two main forages, they tend to get into trouble because those things go up and down. They get viruses, or they just die off, or whatever happens. They eat them out of house and home. We've seen that on Lake Huron. And knock on wood, we've just been fortunate that we don't have those issues or haven't had major issues like that here. And we've kind of survived a lot of the stuff that you're hearing people talk about, like, the algae blooms and zebra mussels and all that stuff. And we're just healthy. I mean, again, no biologist, but we've got a lot of fish and things are good.
You're on the west end of the lake, and that's kind of known as sort of the nursery of Lake Erie. That's where all the new ones come from. Can you tell us a little bit about the differences between that east end and the west end where you're located?
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm a shameless plug I'm going to do here, but we just had Travis Hartman, the fisheries Lake Erie program director, I think is his title, on my podcast. And we put a bunch of videos on my YouTube that were kind of broken down by specific questions. And one that just blew my mind, because if you're familiar with Lake Erie at all, you can kind of picture this. The west end, let's say from like Sandusky-ish to the west, is what we're going to call the Western Basin. And that's, like you said, that's the nursery. That's where those fish all come to spawn during ice season. That's where a majority of them, migrate down to. And that is where, again, I'm making up a number here, but it's probably 80, 90%. I can't remember the exact number of like licensed guides in sport fishing and tourism are at. But yet, when Travis was on there with the thing, he said that now with all the tracking studies they have, it's much more accurate than when I was a kid keeping track of these fish. Something like 90% of the fish actually travel out of that western basin, basically, maybe a few weeks ago. Let's talk about May-ish. So that number blew my mind. So you have all of these guys fishing for between 5 and less than 10% of the actual fish. It's kind of crazy. I mean, it's a big pond, but it's just crazy to me how many of them actually leave and don't come back till the fall.
Yeah, how do you handle that as a guide? That was something I wanted to talk to you about tonight, was kind of the seasonalities of your neck of the woods. And I know everybody kind of lives for that spring walleye fishing, but things move out of there. How does that change your job as those fish migrate out of your area?
I'm not going to give you all the secrets, but I kind of like to fish that are more when I can that are I mean, it's a kind of a Captain Obvious statement, but I like to fish that I know are going to be more predictable. And open water fish are not predictable, and they're a little more grumpy. So I try to avoid that when I can, especially when we get into some of those transition times where you don't have to fish that way. And when you start fishing on somewhere like, the central or eastern basin, and there's nothing out there, and you can't see shore, it could be difficult because those fish, you may come out, you may just have the best day of your life. You come out the very next day, and those fish have moved 5, 6, 7, 8 miles or more. So it's much more difficult to stay on those fish. They don't really have a rhyme or reason to what they're doing. So, back west, we have more things to kind of hold on, almost like a bass fishing situation, even though I don't like using the green carp, relationship there, but it really is much in the same way. And then you ask, how does a guide handle it? Being real. A lot of it too is, there's more to it when you're guiding. You got people that are coming in, they want to see the tourist stuff. Maybe the kids are going to Cedar Point. So there definitely is some places throughout the season that I tell guys, hey, we really should go here, even though it's a pain in the butt. It's taking a lot more time and money out of my pocket, to go do. And they're like, because that area is not as set up with tourism, let's say food and lodging and something maybe for the wife to do or the kids to do either after fishing or maybe they're not even fishing with us. So there's so many elements that come into it. And the other thing that's really nice about down where I'm at here is we've got a lot of islands. We've got basically almost about 14, 15 miles kind of broken up that provide a big wind block. Like tomorrow, we're going to have a big, east wind. It's howling out there right now. And so you always have some place you can fish. Maybe it's not the most ideal thing. And so when you're talking about from a guide standpoint, it's not always, hey, can I catch 100 fish today? Sometimes it's kind of like that slow and steady, tortoise versus the hare thing.
All right, we're starting to get a few questions come in. We'll start with John Acerno, and he wants to know if he's from YouTube. He wants to know if you're dealing with a lot of short fish these days.
I was. There was maybe 3-4 days ago for about 3 or 4 days that I definitely had some short fish. And I would say anywhere, the thing that I get is short fish is to me, it's two different things. You get those fish that are like 8 to maybe 12 inches because those are really, really difficult. We've got a lot of fish now right at 14 inches. So this fall, that's probably going to be a legal size fish. Actually just talking to the fisheries guys about that. And they said, maybe even like 13s will be, catchable or keepable, I should say, this fall. But those short fish that are like, let's say 8 to 12 inches, those are tough because you don't always know that they're on. They steal stuff. It's difficult to release them even if you're casting or doing something. So those can be a huge pain in the butt. But there's definitely ways to do things differently. You just have to kind of work through things. There's a lot of things like small spoons. Those are just a go-to for small fish, and so that's not something that I'm doing right now.
All right, here's another question. This is from YouTube again, and I'm going to hopefully be able to pronounce this city correctly. It's from Jim Weiss. Says okay, thank you for saving me there. He says the perch are gone. What do you think happened?
We ate them all. I don't know. Yeah, they've lowered the perch limit, I believe. I think it's 10 fish over there. A lot of those guys, we've got a big commercial fish operation down here where they do the processing, and I know those guys have really, really been struggling. So I'm not going to start throwing daggers. I mean, you could say some mismanagement. You could say this and that. I don't know. But perch also don't live as long. You have some bad hatches. But it does seem in my lifetime, but the perch is always just a roller coaster. It's up and down, it's up and down, up and down. But I'm no biologist, so I'm going to stick to what I do know. But I do know that those perch populations are up and down a lot, and it causes definitely a big stir for sure.
Even in our neck of the woods, they're pretty cyclical. You can go out there one year and pound them, and maybe 3 or 4 more years before you find them like that again. All right, here's a Facebook question. This one from Ryan Sharp, and he'd like to know, what's your most productive speed at the ball for walleye with spoons and harnesses?
Most productive speed at the ball. Well, I don't use downriggers if that's what we're meaning by ball, but speed is a relative thing. That's why when you're using a Fishhawk, like today was a prime example, we went into the waves to start the day, and I know even my guy was like, I've watched enough of your stuff to know that we don't go into the waves here. But the current, was the opposite of basically the wind, and that was kind of switching around. So that's going to change a lot. And if you don't use a Fishhawk, shameless plug, you're in trouble, because even 2 or 3 tenths is going to change, so much as where your lures are wiggling, or, the weights are going to be up or down. But it's not a good answer. But, in summertime, we may be upwards of 2.5 miles an hour. And if you're a crank and spoon guy, maybe you're almost pushing 3 miles an hour on your speed over ground. But I generally fish a lot slower than everybody. I would say most of the time I'm 0.8 to 1.4.
And are you generally fishing with harnesses?
I used to, but cranks have been so deadly. And again, kind of trying to cover more water and stay out of those little smaller fish. At times that's definitely a better thing. And I know everybody wants like a 2+2 answer on this, but these are things, like in my boat when I open up compartments and guys are like, so what are we doing? And I'm like, I would not be having this much equipment in the boat if I didn't think that I might have to call an audible. And, that's the difference between a guy that's a good guide, is I'm comfortable with all that stuff. And I really do make a lot of audibles.
Let's talk about that for a second. I mean, obviously, you have a YouTube channel. You've got a ton of subscribers. People are watching what you're doing. You're putting out a lot of content, talking about what you're doing. And you just said a few minutes ago, one of your clients said, hey, I know this isn't really what you say we should be doing, but we're doing it. What's that like for you to have these clients come in and they kind of already have a little bit of an idea? They've already read a few pages of your book, if you will, already. What's that like for you when you've got people out there that at least feel like they know a little bit about you before you get out there?
Right. And I'm not sure what's better. If you got the guy that's got a little bit of knowledge there, because then he's calling you on your BS or something, or you get somebody who just shows up that doesn't know anything that's going on. And from day to day, I get both of those for sure. But I honestly like the guys that are, I don't want to say educated, but know what's going on, pay attention. I think the biggest thing is to, I know you didn't ask this, but as a guide, the best thing you can hope for out of a client is somebody that's just paying attention and working with you. A guy's sitting up there with, on his cell phone playing all day, and you're missing fish, or you need help with something or clearing some lines because he's texting all day. That wears a guy like me out. But having a guy that is paying attention to stuff, and especially I take it as the ultimate compliment, when somebody says, hey, I read this in your book, or I watched that video. And then it's great because I'll explain to them what my thought process is. And I tell them I'm not always right, but here's why I'm going to do this. And so that's a good thing.
All right, cool, Ross. Tell us about that. You kind of got into that with those lines in the boat. Let's talk a little bit about your kind of trolling program. How many rods are you typically running? Again, we've got a 22-footer open bow boat. How many lines do you typically run when you're out trolling for walleyes?
Well, we used to only be able to run 2 lines per person. And so, a lot of my trips they're pretty much all 1 to 3 people. So, in the past, I was able to run 4, maybe 6 lines, something like that. And now we can run really more than I got room for. And I think that sometimes was it grandma used to say, everybody's grandma said, the hurrier I go, the behinder I get. So running something like night crawlers, if you're doing that, I generally don't run much more than 6. In the last little bit, to kind of narrow things down and figure things out quickly, I'll start with maybe 8 and go down to 6. Because once you get things kind of figured out, sometimes less is more, for sure. As we get into the summer and I start fishing deeper water, which is not always the case, but generally speaking, if we're using something like dipsy divers, or a combination of techniques where I may be using planer boards and divers or some down stuff, maybe a few more rods, because you can kind of comfortably do that without, screwing up the spread. So there's not a good answer to that either, but generally less than most guys. Because the other thing too is, it's kind of way off topic and probably not what you were asking for, but, part of being a good guide too is to not get your fish in 10 minutes. You don't want to catch them too fast. I don't want to catch them too slow, because some of these fish that we're catching in that deep water, or when you're using things like night crawler harnesses, they're always not releasable. So I don't want to get somebody off the lake too much or too fast, and I don't want to have fish that are not able to be released. So.
All right, that's kind of a nice little secret of the pro there. Don't want to catch them too fast. It sounds like a tough problem to have.
Or too slow. I'm telling you, and that, see, you got to put both of those things together, because now all of a sudden now you become a nut job. Like, you're like, oh, too fast, too slow. And it was kind of like that today. They started coming two at a time, and I'm like, ugh. But it's a lot better than not catching anything, right? So.
And once again, folks, if you got questions for Captain Ross Robertson, put them in the comments there. And again, at the end of the night here, we will pick our question of the evening. You talk about those fish moving deeper as the temperatures go up. Tell us a little bit about how that whole fishery in your neck of the woods, how that kind of moves through the season. Let's talk about the seasonalities of walleye fishing in that Port Clinton area.
We have, it's kind of like spawning. People always say, well, when do your fish spawn here? Lake Erie is a different animal. It's kind of like a mom and pa shop, or, General Motors. We've got a much bigger operation here. So even things like spawning in the springtime is, it's in waves, it's in multiple phases. And it's the same thing with open water. I mean, you can have fish in the deep basin. We've got fish right now that are basically leaving or left the western end, and they're headed down probably around east of Cleveland to Erie, Pennsylvania, in that range. They tend to hang out in there in some of that deep, cool water, and then they cycle and come back. But yet we've got fish that stay in the Maumee River, which is about knee deep in pure mud and boil on hot water for whatever reason. We get fish in the summertime too that go shallow. We actually have some weed beds here not a lot of guys know about. Wink, wink. And that's a really good place too. You got more oxygen in there. You've got rocks, you've got wind blowing up on that. It creates it. So it's really no different than some of the small Minnesota lakes I know you're familiar with, Chris. And there's just a lot of different techniques, and there's a lot of different locations that happen here. And you tend to see the same stuff with big boat guys, because they're going to drift the open water. But there's a lot more that you can do, and I think that's one thing that I see with some of the grizzled old guides, and then also people that come here from other places like Minnesota, Wisconsin, or Dakotas, where they kind of hit on some of that stuff that a lot of the locals don't even know, because it's the same thing that these guys are doing in other states, and it works here too.
All right, what's it like as things go kind of from summer into fall? What is that September, October area? What's that like fishing in your neck of the woods?
September can be tough. Maybe not the fishing end as much, but just getting there, because you got to think about like this. We've got a lake that's maybe pushing 80 degrees, and we know in roughly 30 to 45 days it's going to be 50 something. And that only happens one way. And it's just like we got going on right now. Big northeast winds, east winds, to cool that lake down. And, that's a bad deal. So there's a lot of days you're sitting on shore. Most of the lake, I know you could argue this, but we don't really have a thermocline. We have a temperature break. Now, certain places over east, they actually do at times have a defined thermocline by definition. So that can kind of mess things up too when you start getting that water shifting, the water flopping, as you hear people say. So September would probably be what I would say the toughest time to fish here, because just getting out, and then also that it's not the prime situation. But then it flips very quickly, and October, November is some of the best fishing of the year for sure.
And a lot of people don't think of Lake Erie as a ice fishing destination, but you're a 365-day-a-year guide. Tell us a little bit about that ice fishing you have in your neck of the woods for these walleyes. It's
my favorite thing to do. It absolutely is my favorite thing to do. And yeah, we don't get a season that's 4 or 5 months long like you do, Chris. But the thing is I'm going to dig you a little bit here, right? You Minnesota guys are either throwing plywood down or wearing hip waders to catch your fish. It's like the first and last bite is so good in that center thing when you're in your sleeper house and, driving trucks out there. Can we be honest? It's not always the best fishing, right? And our season, while not super, super long, it's generally pretty good fishing. And that's really a nice thing about here. But I work off of the Bass Islands, and I take my stuff over there before the things freeze up and the boats get put away. So we can fish out there where it's locked in, which is a huge, huge deal. And fortunately, I have some good friends there that make that possible. So it's my favorite thing to do, bar none.
All right, we're starting to get a couple more questions here. This one's from YouTube, and we talked about it a little bit earlier, but this one's from John over on YouTube as well. So he says, have you been catching more fish on meat, still on spoons or cranks?
John wants that swag bag. I can see it. I don't. Am I eligible for this? I mean,
You've already got the hat.
Yeah, I do. I like. This is actually. I'll tell you. I like this hat. But yeah, I haven't been using spoons yet. That's just not my deal. Until I have to. Because I just don't like fishing fast. I'm just not a power fishing guy. For many reasons, but I like fishing meat. I've fished meat here the last little bit. We're kind of flip-flopping back and forth with crankbaits. It really comes down to more where I'm at and then also where the fish are in the column. If the fish get really deep with cranks at this time of year, it can just get much more difficult to get them there and maintain them there, a lot more hassle. And then when you're trying to check lines. So if I can fish meat effectively, that's what I like to do. But I have both rods that I've been kind of flip-flopping back and forth. But I did set the spoons on my deck there next to my boat, and those will be going in the boat very, very soon, probably this weekend.
All right, here's one from Randy. And Randy is he's on the show just about every week watching. And this is a good question for you because you get a chance to talk about the X2 here. He says, you said you do not run downriggers, wants to know how you run your probe on your Fishhawk.
Well, that's actually how I got to come with Fishhawk, because we helped design that X2 because there was a certain individual at Fishhawk that saw me modifying a certain deal and said, "What are you doing?" So I basically have a short rod it's available from Fishhawk, and I put an old line counter reel on there with some braided line, and it just goes in a rod holder right at my console. And if you go on my Facebook or any of those things, you can see it because I never take that X2 off in open water. And I've got it right next to my console, and I'll set it in and out of there as needed. You can even leave it in there the way I have it as you're running to and fro. I do put it away when I'm traveling down the road with the truck, but it's super, super, super portable. It's basically like the straw deal, kind of the Chinese straw trick, if you will. And then I'm using just a big weight. You can use it. I think Fishhawk offers, I believe it's a 16-ounce weight. I've got another one that I'll use when I'm in deeper water that I believe is 32 ounces. It's like basically a big torpedo. Realistically, the 16th ounces is enough for most stuff. But I really, really, really like that. It's just easy to deploy and super simple, because if it's not, you just don't use it as much. Let's just be real.
Yeah, Randy, check it out. It's the X2, and you can see a lot of stuff on Ross's channel. And if you see these guys who are fishing similar ways to the way Ross does on these trailerable boats, and they're out there on Lake Erie, it's a very, very cool way to use the Fishhawk and get that Fishhawk data without the downrigger. And once you see it, you'll really see the magic in it. Like Ross said, he'd actually kind of homemade one out of an X4, and that kind of was the birth of the X2. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, honestly, there's no show here. I mean, it's the real deal. You tell people, you break it down, and they're like, I don't know if I need that, and I simply say, how many times does an average troller look down and see what a speed over ground is? I mean, 1,000 times a day, even subconsciously looking at that. I mean, at least anybody that's pretty good at it will. But realistically, if I said, hey, you can get an item and buy it and look at it just like your watch right in front of you, what your real speed is of your lure, it's a game changer, because the simple thing is how many times have you gone left to right or trolling west to east and you caught 10 fish, 15 fish, and you turn back around to come through when it's flat calm and you catch 1 or 2 or none. And the reality is you're not doing the same speed, and you're generally off way, way more than you could ever imagine because of set and drift with the currents. And if I said, hey, you can get something, buy it, and put it in your boat and tell you exactly what that number is, and you don't, anybody that fishes the Great Lakes or really anywhere with current they're crazy.
Yeah, the first time I got to see this in action, Ross, I started working for the company. We were doing some trolling out on Lake Erie, and we were pulling worms at 1.3 miles an hour, and the action was so fast. We were trying to film stuff, and we couldn't film because we kept getting interrupted by fish. And the guy we were out there with says, I'll fix that, and he popped it up. So we went from 1.3, we were catching all the fish, up to 1.6. So we could kind of basically make those worms not do what they needed to do so we could film stuff. So just that 0.3 miles per hour on the Hawk, it went from we were catching fish and we couldn't even film to now we could do our stuff. And I don't think a lot of people realize, at least people that haven't seen this in action, realize just how big a part of the toolbox that this can be.
Speed kills, either good or bad.
All right. This one's from Eric Modney, and Eric has been on the podcast before. He's a Toronto angler. He says, what colors do you prefer for peak summer deep walleyes? What temperature zone do you target with the Fishhawk? He's not a walleye guy, but he's looking to diversify.
Gotcha. If you watch anything that I do, you know that I'm going to tell you, forget the color thing, because there's just so many more things. I know it's definitely the most fun thing to talk about, but I'm not going to say it doesn't matter, but there's so many other things to worry about before that. Don't go crazy. And even where you're at, from the western to the central to the eastern basin, that you tend to see, little color preferences for whatever reason. I think a lot like Lake Michigan, like Silver Streak has Ludington watermelon, and then you've got Manistee watermelon, all these different colors and things as you go throughout. The one trend that has been on Lake Erie, though, is chrome colors. Doesn't always, hold true, but chrome stuff has been better on crankbaits than painted or the see-through, like bare naked stuff. So that would be one thing I'd probably start gearing some, if you don't have some chromes, to do that, because there was probably a 5 or 6 year period where there wasn't a lot of chrome colors on a lot of the popular baits, or they weren't selling anyhow. As far as depth-wise, I don't really look at a temperature at all, because realistically, it's all about the bait fish. So if you find the bait, you're going to find the walleyes. We don't go up and down as much as like a Lake Michigan or Lake Huron. We don't have a blow where all of a sudden our water temperature is going to change 10, 15, 20 degrees with any frequency at all. So, if you get really far east, you may see a temperature break on your graph, but even then I've caught them above and below that. So look for the bait in the summer and you will find the fish, I promise.
All right, we got one here from Rick Bauer, and Rick says, if you're marking fish in 40 feet of water, 10 feet off the bottom, what depth do you put your Fishhawk, and are you changing that at all during the day?
I like to get the Fishhawk thing within reason, close to where I'm catching them, which is another reason I like having that X2 at my console, so it's farther away from my lures if I was to dead stick something, or so nothing would get tangled up or netting or anything like that. But the one thing that I would encourage you guys, I just ran an educational trip a few days ago with electronics, and that was the whole focus, was electronics. And I blew the guy's mind by letting a fish go, and he watched it go down on the graph. And we've got a lot of stuff on my YouTube page with this, and even some of the pictures I put up on Instagram, where you have to understand that where you see like 30 feet on your graph doesn't mean that fish is at 30 feet. And we've got a really good thing, actually, High Tech Fishing. Old Bruce Sampson, give him a little plug. He did a deal with a tennis ball, and he tethered it 18 inches above in his pool. And based on where that transducer is, his wife kicked through the little raft across and showed, the difference of when you mark that below you and then out to the side, because in 40 feet, your transducer may have a 15, 16, 17, 18 foot, beam that we're covering. And so depending on where you're marking those in there, you're not actually where you think you are. So I always like to spread my lines out. I do it much more than most people. And I just let the fish tell me where it's at. Narrow it down there from there.
So we've talked Fishhawk quite a bit tonight. It's Fishhawk Live. That's what we do. But tell us a little bit about some of the other electronics that you're running on your boat and those tools that you're using to catch fish, Ross.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess kind of expand upon that last question is, guys, I rarely, I'm sure people don't want to hear me say this, or some of the people I work with, but I don't look at my electronics that much when I'm fishing open water, assuming I'm still catching fish. Because the one thing that I think I can, with fishing, it's tough to have hard rules, right? There's a lot of guys that get on these things and they tell you this is how it is. And most of the time we just don't know. We've got some gray areas in there, or a lot. And I like to mark them at speed. So I run a Humminbird Helix unit, and I've got that 12-inch screen that is full sonar when I'm running. And I really think that's important because I can see that column and see much better. And I'm marking fish at speed. And it's amazing, Chris, how many days just this year alone, let alone through my career, that I'm marking the tar out of fish when I'm driving 25, 30 miles an hour. And then when I stop and slow down, I don't mark a single thing. And I go through them and I catch them like a bandit. And, those fish spook. The cone is not as big as you think, especially, again, when the cone's like this, right? So if these fish are even halfway down, you're just not having that much range. And those fish, they spook out. So I don't know how many days just this year that I have caught fish like fire and I'm not marking anything. Yet I go put the boat back on plane to run back, make another pass, and I'm marking them again. So that's one of the reasons I don't really watch that too much. I do kind of formulate a rough deal, when I'm running on plane, because I feel like those numbers are a little truer. But I still spread my stuff out. And I know people think that I'm dodging the question, but I'm not. If you fished with me, you know that I spread my stuff out and I make adjustments fairly quickly from there. But I still leave them spread out even throughout the day if I've got enough guys to run a few lines, one being a little high, one being a little low. Because the worst thing you can do is leave fish that maybe slide up or down and you quit catching and you think the fish are gone, especially if you're not marking them like we just talked about. But what happened is those fish just slid up or down because of the conditions changing and you missed it because you got everything locked in that same zone. Big mistake.
All right, Eric Mondi, just looking for a little clarification on your last answer. He says, so you're just using the X2 primarily for speed at the lure then?
For the most part, yeah. I mean, for what I do, the temperature thing isn't a huge deal. I mean, do I drop it down there even if I'm not using it for that? Like another advantage, one of my buddies the other day was like, I never thought about that. It was kind of the elephant in the room. Even jig fishing, when you do get some of that cold water in the springtime that blows in, or, there's different places that we're fishing, and sometimes a degree or two cooler or warmer in the spring or the fall makes a big, big difference. Again, primarily because of bait fish. So if you're fishing, like I said, let's say a reef complex 10 miles this way and it's 1 or 2 degrees warmer or cooler, that can make a big difference if it's as effective or not. So I'll drop that X2 down just for the temperature. But generally when I'm trolling, the temperature is not a big consideration for me. That lure speed, like you mentioned with the 1.3 to 1.6, that is the absolute game changer.
All right, here's one from Nanette Hanley over on Facebook. She'd like to know, do the currents become more of a factor in the deeper depths?
That's a tough one to answer because if you're on like a shallow rock pile and those currents are ripping through there, it's no different than if you were in a swimming pool and you had a strong undertow. That's going to rip just as hard and be as big of a deal. But I think that the currents probably play a bigger play for people because they tend to be more pocketed. I think in shallower water, they tend to go more one direction. In the open water, it's just that I drive off of that X2 because it's not like you go, okay, I got it figured out, I'm going to drive in a straight angle. You can be going, all of a sudden you're stalling, and now you've got to curve and go here. Because if you look at some of those government websites that have the current charts on them, you'll see that there's a lot of swirls out there in big areas where those currents are going. And it's not necessarily just a west to east thing, especially as the wind direction changes. So they matter in everything. I guess you could maybe say in deep water that's a bigger deal.
All right. Zach, question here, wants to know if you're using lead core to run your crankbaits.
I mean, I have probably 30 or 40 reels, rigged up with segmented or full cores of lead, but they're kind of lonely. There's a little bit of dust on them. We don't have to use that. There's so many other ways to do it. And it's more time consuming, and it's more of a tangle situation. So I like crankbaits that I can get down to depth, a little easier with. Sometimes I'm snap weighting. There's braids, some other options that you can do, but it's tough to run as many lines, especially since I pick up and I may run back through. It's just not as efficient, and we don't have to do it.
All right, Ross, here's one from Gordon McChesney, and this will be interesting answer. Wants to know, what is your go-to speed for Central Basin walleye?
There's no answer for that, Gordon, I'd love to help you out, but that's like saying what one color crankbait do I use? I'm not trying to give you a dig, but that changes daily. You let the fish tell you what's going on, and it changes a lot, and a lot of it because of that current situation. But the big thing you do is do some slow S's. You'd be amazed at how many times you catch them. Just about maybe 3-4 days ago, I was doing a turn to avoid a knucklehead who literally decided to stop in front of me, and I don't know what he was doing. And I mean, the fast side, my boards were screaming because I did such a violent turn, and I had 2 go hard. And then on my inside, my lines were literally sinking to the bottom, and I dropped one there too. So sometimes you're just on the fish that want to bite, but the point is those speeds were totally different. But that on a day that maybe the bite isn't as good, something like a slow S or just changing it up and down is going to tell you pretty quick. I hit the rabbit button on the Minn Kota on my bow mount all the time. I got one fish doing that today that kind of gave me a little bit of a trick to speed up a few tenths. And when I did that, we got quite a few more bites. So, I mean, the range is huge. As it's 0.8 to, pushing 3 miles an hour.
Let's talk about that for a second, Ross. You hit the button on your Minn Kota. Is that typically kind of the way you roll, is with your kicker or with your bow mount or with your kicker?
I use the kicker for thrust. I never use it for steering unless I'm trying to do a hard turn or got, like I said, some knucklehead stopped in front of us, or we're trying to do a big spin. 90% of my stuff, if not more than that, is with my Minn Kota, and I almost, like I said, I'll lock my kicker into place and even use that for steering unless it's a kind of a violent turn situation. And I'm really, excuse me, I'm not using my kicker even nearly as much as I used to in those circumstances. Because of technology again. It's so much easier to make those micro adjustments with a trolling motor and having where your bow is at, to kind of kick that boat around. And my Ranger tracks really good, so that really, really, really helps. It's a heavy boat and it's kind of lower profile. If you have a higher boat, maybe that doesn't work as well for you, or something with a big windshield, or that's 3 feet off the water. Some of the aluminum boats are a little more difficult to do this, but I'm running Dakota lithium batteries, and it is insane. I was actually going into the current today, and I was on a 7.5 on the Minn Kota remote. Anybody that has one knows what that is, and anybody that has one would also know that you wouldn't want to do that really long, because you're not going to get through a traditional day trolling like that, let alone, you probably wouldn't even get through 3 or 4 hours even with good batteries. But these Dakota lithium 100 amps that I'm running, I can go probably about 2.5 days. So it really changes my boat control for the better.
You talked about going into the current. Here's a question from Diane on Facebook. Wants to know if it's best to fish with or against that current, or does it vary? My guess is you're going to say the third thing.
It can vary. I mean, most of the time you want to be going with the current. I'll check things all the time because, again, if I'm all by myself and I'm catching fish, and kind of like the question about the lead core, I generally fish a lot smaller patches, and I'm going to pick up and I'm going to come, motor back around and come through with trolling through, but use the big motor to drive me around. And if I can avoid that, that's amazing. Most of the time I can't. So I'll try to check that, and maybe I'll start to do a turn, or I'll go turn and do a short distance and see, hey, can I catch them going into the current? I would say maybe 1 out of 10 days that is equal or better. Most of the time you're going to want to be going with the current or quartering off of it.
All right, here's a good one here. What pound test do you run off with your inline planer boards with stick baits?
Well, I'm more than pound test. I'm using 0.015 diameter. Actually, it's a hair less. It's like 0.014 or something. And the reason is because of, a lot of the crankbaits and a lot of my other buddies, we're all using the same stuff. So you have to be really careful about saying pound test, because as a good example, Berkeley line, if you use that 10-pound XT, 12-pound big game, 14-pound XL, or basically in between 16 and 20-pound Sunline, which is what I use, those are all basically the same diameter. So again, you go into your sporting goods store, you look at Fish USA, and they got 5,000 lines on that page, and you go, hey, Ross said to get 16-pound test. It really, really varies from company to company. So look for something that's got that approximately 0.014, pushing 0.015 diameter. And that way you're going to be closer to a lot of the dive charts that are available and a lot of the guys that fish all the time like myself.
All righty. Gordon McChesney is back, and I think we need a little bit more info here, Gordon. But Ross, maybe you can just give him a spot to kind of start with. He says he just installed new Fishhawk. First run, what should he aim for lure speed tomorrow?
First run tomorrow, guys. Tell me what to aim for a 2.5. I'm a little confused. Tell me to aim for a 2.5 lure speed.
I think he's asking kind of where he should start.
Well, I mean, if you're going to be in that 2 to 2+ range, you're probably looking at spoons or crankbaits. Is that kind of what we're thinking?
I think that's the thing. I think we got to have a little bit more information as far as what you're starting. Let's just say he's going to go out and run spoons. Ross, where would you have him start?
Man, Gordon's got me confused a little bit. I'm not going to lie to you. But if you're using spoons or you're fishing faster like that, because that's what your boat does, maybe Gordon's boat, he can't get her down or something like that. Even if you're using night crawler harnesses, probably just look at something with willow blades or something that excels at those parameters. But the big thing is, go out there, spread your lines out. Again, it really, really matters. Marking at speed, if your boat's set up for that, that's the biggest thing. Please do that, people. It makes your life a lot easier. To spread those things out, and then just narrow it down from there. I like to make my 2 inside lines on both sides of the boat really kind of experimentals, and I'll move stuff up and down nonstop. And it's a lot of days that bails me out, where I figure out, kind of what the fish are doing.
Ross, how about reels? We've been talking a lot of electronic stuff like that. How about rod and reel setup? What are your favorites there for what you do?
I've been using Shimano Takotas for, I'm going to say roughly 20 years, whenever they came out, probably. I realized real fast, like, they're just really, really nice. And I've recently got the new Takotas, which are really nice. They're really super smooth. They're a little more lower profile, a little easier to handle, a little easier in the rod locker. But I've kept my old ones, and I'm using those for like my spinner fishing and stuff like that, because the ratio, or at least the line retrieval, how much line you take in, is less. So I like that, and I'm using the newer style ones that take in a little more line per crank for cranking, because it's generally when you're spinner fishing, slower is better. When you reel fast, it ends poorly. So I've been using those things forever. As far as rods, I kind of bounce around and stuff like that. I can't really say the exact thing because I've been working with Shimano. We've got a really cool rod that I've been working with those guys for over a year designing, that is going to be available very, very soon. Which they'll probably be mad I even said that. But the Compre 8'3" Shimano rod is amazing for board fishing and for crankbaits. I mean, I love it. The handle, everything is set up for longevity. That's the problem with a lot of trolling rods. You look at them and they fall apart. The components on them are not great, and that's definitely not the case with the Shimano Compre. That 8'3" telescoping, it's easier in the garage. It's easier in the rod locker, in the boat. Telescopes down really easy, and I really, really, really like that rod. And for you spinner guys, just hold tight. We got something coming.
All right, Ross, really appreciate you coming on tonight. Is there something I didn't ask you about tonight that you'd like to talk about?
My favorite ice cream.
All right, let's hear it.
I don't have one. It's like crankbait colors. It was a loaded question. I am eating, though, a Toffs, which is a dairy here that has insane ice cream. Chris, when we get together to do some fishing, I'm going to take you to Toffs. They have it has actually cheesecake, real cheesecake pieces in it, and it's like cookies and cream. I just got done with a bowl before we got going here as a little energy go, and it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
That sounds amazing. I can't wait for some Toffs.
It's amazing.
All right, Ross, tell us a little bit about how to get in touch with you, and go ahead and plug that YouTube channel as well so people can find you there. You've got a lot of awesome information. Really, your YouTube channel answers a ton of the questions that were asked tonight. I think if you guys went there, they could get a really good education to get started here.
Yeah, I mean, I am a guide. I've been doing that forever, and I've got guys that work, for me that so we can accommodate larger parties if you want to do something or run an educational trip, learn about your electronics, whatever it may be. But I also hired on my producer for my TV shows with me for a long time, and now he works with Bigwater Fishing, and he's doing a lot of our stuff. So we've kind of upped the bar, as you've seen. We've got everything from cooking segments on there, how to cook your catch, and we're doing tons of educational stuff, of course. We've got podcasts with guys like Gary Roach, and we've got a few coming out here with people that, let's just say, super mega famous legends that don't do podcasts, and I'm very, very excited about. But Bigwater Fishing, go to bigwaterfishing.com, which is my website that has all the links to all of these things, the past podcasts and videos and all that. YouTube, it's Bigwater Fishing as well. Instagram, Facebook. Pretty much if you type in Bigwater Fishing, you're going to find us.
Yeah, Ross has got an awesome Instagram too. If you're there, he's always putting stuff up. And if you don't know Ross, you'll find out that Ross likes to joke around a lot too. He's a good follow. A lot of fun to see him, and we really appreciate you coming on tonight, Ross. It was a lot of fun to have you here, and I hope a lot of people learned some stuff.
Always enjoy it. Appreciate the call.
All right, for Ross Robertson, I'm Chris Larson. Have a great night, and we will see you next week. We've got a pretty cool guest lined up for next week. It should be fun. We will talk to you later.